Welcome everyone to another episode of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Jerron Harrington, back to hit you another video, and today we're going to be continuing the Spider-Man ReZero series, The Princess and the Spider, Season 2, Part 1. Now, you're going to be asking when this video comes out. It's not Thursday, so why is this video coming out early? Well, the answer for that is quite simple. Tomorrow, for those of you who don't know, is Thanksgiving, and for me personally, I would like to enjoy that day eating good food, watching football, and not trying to stress getting this video out. So I'm using the time that I have today on Wednesday to fulfill my 5 videos for the week. So the video that's supposed to come out Thursday, you're going to be getting it on Wednesday afternoon or evening, whichever one it comes out first as soon as this video can upload. And as for the video that's supposed to come out Friday, that being What If Deku Was a Power Ranger, that series video is going to come out around midnight tonight, so you'll have something to look forward to in terms of that. This way I'll be getting my 5 videos done for the week, and they'll basically free me up to do some different things. Now, Thursday I'm going to be taking off, but Friday I'm not sure what I'll do. Maybe I'll make an extra video, kick off another series a little bit earlier. You might get What If Naruto Was the Avatar Part 2 on Friday. I just feel like I want to try to get this grind going so that I can enjoy some time off, but give you guys some content to enjoy over the holidays as well. So I do hope you'll be enjoying this little bit of arrangement that we'll be having this week. So you're going to be getting What If Spider-Man Was in ReZero. That's going to be coming out this afternoon today. You're going to be getting What If Deku Was a Power Ranger. That's going to be coming out around midnight tonight. And if I'm up for it on Friday, then I'll just hop straight into What If Naruto Was the Avatar Part 2. We'll do that Friday, and then when we come back on Monday, we'll just keep going with What If Naruto Was the Avatar Part 3. So stay tuned for that and everything else that has to come with Power Core Productions and Podcastings. As always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions. But anyway, we're going to get into today's video, so as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. As he came face to face with Echidna, he would have many questions swirling through his head. Was she the one that put him in the predicament that he was in now? What exactly was he supposed to ask her? Could he even fight her in such a state if it came down to it? Echidna would simply smile as she would tell Peter to have a seat at her tea table, and she would pour him a cup. A bit hesitant though, Peter would be polite and would drink the tea, although this wouldn't stop him from keeping his guard up. Echidna would explain to Peter that he had been invited to a witch's tea party, something that for someone like him would be rather rare, and something that he should really take advantage of. However, Peter's main focus was learning about whoever it was that gave him Return by Death. As he would ask her, she would make it very clear that she didn't have the power to do such things, and that it was using all of her power now to keep him protected from the Witch of Envy at that moment. She would make it very clear that it was the Witch of Envy that was his enemy, and the person who would earn his ire. All the same though, she would merely show that she had interest in Peter. However, Peter for the most part was only interested in learning if he could get back to Lagunica, to which she would reply that she could send him there. Of course, she would tempt him with all of the knowledge of the world, but Peter wouldn't stay for too long, as his main focus was getting back to his friends in Lagunica. This, however, would shock the Witch of Envy, Peter seeing a different side of her as she would begin to pout and almost cry as men from all over the world had sought her knowledge and information, and yet Peter, now having almost the golden ticket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, so to speak, he didn't want to take it. Of course, Peter recognized that there were a lot of things that he could learn from her, and he wouldn't mind coming back for another spot of tea sometime, although right now he had other priorities that he had to focus on. While she was disappointed, she would relent and would tell him that they would meet again someday. As Peter would finish the rest of his tea, he would remark that it had a strange taste to it, asking what flavor it was. Echidna would smile as she would reveal that the tea was actually her body fluids. This would cause Peter to want to gag, but he simply had no time to do so. As she would open the portal for Peter to return, she would remark that for his compensation, she would require something. Peter would start to think of the worst case scenario, wondering if she was going to do something drastic like ask for his soul. However, she would remark that she didn't need anything as drastic as that. The only thing she needed as compensation was that he wasn't to tell anyone of their meeting. She would also assure him that the tea he drank was actually for a good reason, as it would grant him the ability to take on the trials that were to come, warning him of the witch's graveyard. Peter wouldn't fully understand what she was talking about. However, he would in due time, as he would find himself going through the portal, everything becoming dark instantly as he would awaken. He would find himself back on the bridge in Lagunica, right where he had passed out, with Rem overseeing him, checking to make sure that he was okay. She would tell him that he had passed out a few seconds ago, Peter thinking that that couldn't have been the case, as he had literally been sent back to his previous world. He had done battle with Thanos, and he had met the Witch of Greed. However, it must have been due to return by death, and this must have been his reset point. He would see that he were back in the clothes that he had before he left in the first place. His old Spider-Man uniform, the one that he used before he got his suit from Tony Stark, as well as the blue cloak that he had been given by Rem along with his sword. Although he could feel one thing in particular. Searching in his pocket, he would find the pendant that he had been given by his Aunt May, that contained the picture of him, of her, and of his late Uncle Ben. Knowing fully well that he hadn't been dreaming, and that what he had experienced was true, he would hold the pendant close to himself, thankful that he had gotten the chance to see them again. After spending some time in the capital of Lagunica, Peter would be seen as a hero, along with Emilia and the others, for their help in defeating the White Whale. As they were preparing to make their way back home with the half of the villagers who had gone to the capital, hoping that the other half who had gone to the sanctuary would have returned back by now, Peter and the others would be feeling a bit more optimistic. Although, for Peter, there was a lot more that was on his mind. That mainly being that of Roswald. It hadn't been lost on Peter that Roswald had been acting rather strange. He thought it was first by mere coincidence, but when he died in one of the earlier loops, Roswald never left the manor. However, in the loop that he was able to save everyone, he did. Also, in all of the previous loops, it was always assumed that Roswald had been at the manor when the witches' cult attacked. However, from everything that he were gathering now, that didn't seem to be the case. Whenever there seemed to be danger on the horizon, Roswald was never anywhere to be found. For someone as powerful as him, it would be imperative that he would be where he was needed to at all times. Something that Peter couldn't fully shake off. After dropping off the villagers, Peter, along with Rem and Emilia, would eventually make their way, driven by Otto, back to the mansion. As they arrived, they would be greeted by none other than Frederica, along with the young girl from the village, Petra, who had now taken to working as a maid. Peter would be introduced to Frederica as she was a longtime servant in the mansion, although before he had even arrived, shortly she had taken a sabbatical, as there were some things she needed to take care of. Although now she had been asked to return as there was no one to attend to the mansion, as everyone had been absent due to the attacks. Frederica would welcome them all in, and they would explain the situation. Frederica would tell them that Roswald had not returned, and that neither had the villagers, and that for all intents and purposes they were still at the sanctuary. Now this left even more questions than answers. Why had Roswald not returned back to the mansion with the others? Was something holding them? Rem was worried for her sister Rom, but she was assured that they would be okay in the meantime. Pierre and Amelia would decide that they would go to the sanctuary to see how they were doing, Otto being the one that would take them, as he wanted to have a meeting with Roswald in the first place, and seeing as this would be his chance, this would be all the more incentive for him to go. However, before Peter left, he would stop to go check on Beatrice. Before going into her door, he would knock first, and Beatrice would allow him in. Despite everything that had happened, Beatrice was at least grateful enough that Peter had the courtesy to knock, unlike a certain someone who was not there at the moment. While Peter went to talk to Beatrice, this certain someone would be talked about in passing. Amelia would be trying to defend this young man, stating that he couldn't help it if he had been called on duty somewhere far away. Although even Frederica would have to examine the situation and explain that he seemed to be gone at the most crucial of times. Although what were they going to do about their poor Barisu? Wherever he was hopefully alright, and maybe he'd be back sooner rather than later. Eventually, Peter would speak to Beatrice asking how she were doing. She would explain that she were alright, she supposed. And Peter would ask out of genuine concern. He would reach down to her and give her a hug, Beatrice being entirely confused as to why Peter was being so close and formal. Of course, though, she didn't actually stop him from giving her a hug, as he would pull back, explaining that in all the craziness that had happened, he had completely forgotten to come and get her, and he viewed that as a personal stain on his legacy as a hero. He was supposed to be someone who could protect and take care of all of those who were close to him, and the fact that he hadn't done so with her was something that had been weighing on his mind. However, Beatrice would reassure him that everything were alright, and that she could take care of herself if any cultists tried to attack. As Pierre would tell her of what happened in their fights with the White Whale and such, as well as them coming face to face with the one known as Pelogus, Beatrice would ask what had happened to his witch factor. Pierre wasn't entirely sure of what she meant by this, and Beatrice would simply dismiss it all for now. However, she would see that he did have his own concerns. He would explain that he wasn't entirely sure about Roswald at the moment, that something about him just didn't seem to add up. All the same, Beatrice would tell him to be on guard while at the sanctuary, and that Roswald may have the answers that he sought. He would take this into consideration and thank her as he left. Peter, Amelia, and Otto would begin to make their way to the sanctuary. Before leaving, Frederica would give them a special stone that would allow them to pass through the barrier that she had told them about, and that they were also to show this to a young man named Garfield if they ran into him, as he was her brother. They would remember as they would set their journey toward. As they made their journey, Amelia would remark that she was a little bit nervous about everything, although Pierre would assure her that everything would be fine. As they made their way to the forest, the gemstone that they had been given by Frederica would start to glow. In a bright light, Amelia would fall unconscious, and Otto soon as well, as the dragon carriage would stop. Pierre would try to check to see if his friends were alright, but they didn't seem to be responding. Outside in the forest, he would see a young girl with long pink hair, and he would attempt to chase after her, although she wouldn't respond at all, as she would just continue on her way. As Pierre made his way through the sanctuary, he would soon come across the stone building, although he wouldn't get too far, as a voice would call out to him from behind. You got a lot of nerve coming in here, newcomer. Most new guys don't show up here unless they're looking for a quick death. The young blonde-haired man with spiky teeth would jump down to greet Peter. Peter's spire sense going off as he could sense that this one might be hostile. The young man would get into a fighting stance as he would lunge himself towards Peter. Peter, using his spire sense and his reflexes, would be able to dodge with ease, countering some of his attacks with a few of his own, although he could feel that from some of his punches he was rather tough. It didn't take Peter too long to see the resemblance between him and Frederica. As he tried to speak some sense into him, the young man wouldn't listen, viewing him as an enemy. Peter, having no choice, would bind him in his webbing, pinning him to a tree. He thought that just a few shots would be enough. However, this would prove to be mistaken, as Garfield, after using some of his strength, and through some resistance, would be able to rip through and tear the webbing apart. As he would begin his lunge towards Peter once again, this time getting in a few good shots of his own, knocking him to the ground, Peter would hold up the pendant that he had been given by Frederica. This catching the young man's eye, he would introduce himself as Garfield, and would explain that for them to have his sister's pendant, that it means that she must have sent them here somehow. He would explain that that was indeed the case, and that they were looking for Roswald and the villagers, asking what had happened to them, as they hadn't come back home. Garfield would then enter into the dragon carriage as Otto had reawoken, and he would give directions where the villagers were being kept within the sanctuary, not too far from outside of the barrier. While inside of the carriage, Emilia would soon awaken, and she would be filled in on the situation, as the group would soon arrive to the village square of the sanctuary. They would come out as they would be greeted by Ram, who would be pleased to see that they had made it through safely. Ram would ask Peter how her sister were doing, and he would assure her that she were fine, that she were back at the mansion with Frederica, and that all was well. Ram would smile at Peter and be happy that he had been able to keep her sister safe, and she would tell him that the villagers were safe as well, and she would lead them to where Roswald was being kept. What would shock both Peter as well as Emilia was just how beat up Roswald was, as his body had been completely bandaged as he lay in bed. Well, if it isn't our favorite Spider-Man. Do tell me, Peter, how have things gone for you and Miss Emilia? Roswald, what happened to you? Oh, this? Oh, I've been through much worse in my life. This is nothing, I assure you. No need to worry yourselves. Peter and Emilia would have many questions, but not many of them would be answered at all, as they were mainly trying to figure out what they should do from here. Peter and Emilia would inform them of the situation, telling of the alliance that they had made with Crucia, as well as their dealings with the White Whale, as well as the witch cultists. Roswald would be very pleased at these results, stating that he had been wise to place Emilia in Peter's care, and that he was truly fulfilling his role as her loyal knight. Peter would be a bit put off by Roswald's comments, as he seemed to be eerily creepy in the way that he gave them. All the same, he would still keep a few of the tendencies of the conversation to himself. Although unknown to Peter, Roswald was making mental notes of Peter's reactions as well. They would also come to learn of the Mathers family, as well as their connection to the sanctuary, otherwise known as the Witch's Graveyard, the resting place of Echidna, the Witch of Greed. This would give Peter even more pause for concern. It wasn't by any mere coincidence that Roswald was involved with the Witch of Greed of all people, someone he had recently come into contact with. No one else in the room had actually picked up on it, but Roswald could see that at the mention of Echidna, his eyes began to twitch as they scanned the room all a bit. He could tell that whatever it was about the late Echidna, Peter knew something that he wasn't letting on. In the meantime, the main question would be brought up as to what was happening with the villagers and why they were being kept here. That was when the realization of the situation would be explained to them. That the sanctuary had been locked away by the barrier that was kept around the sanctuary trapped all those of mixed blood. As such, the demi-humans inside had been keeping the villagers hostage until Emilia had arrived, someone who would be capable of going through the trials of the sanctuary. In doing so, that would be the only way to undo the barrier and free everyone. Garfield making it very clear that no one was going to leave until the trial was complete. Peter would be angered at Garfield for attempting to hold people hostage, coming face to face with him once again. Roswald would laugh in the background, as he too would be a bit eager to see what would happen if the two of them were to engage in a fight. However, before they had a chance to do so, Rom and Emilia would stand in between them, calming them down, as Emilia would tell Peter to put his trust into her, just as she had done for him, and that she was going to take on the trial, and that she would help the villagers in her own way. Of course, while Peter was still a bit against it, he would put his faith in her, and as such, Emilia would go to take on the trials. They would arrive to the stone building that they had come across when they entered the sanctuary. This would be the place where the trials would begin. Peter would wish Emilia luck as she would enter inside of the sanctuary that would start to glow. Garfield would explain to them that whenever it glowed, it showed that someone was worthy of taking on the trials. However, just as quickly as the light had begun to shine, it would then dissipate once again. Garfield and the others would become worried, as that was usually a signal that the trial was over, although it couldn't have been done that quickly. Without hesitation, Peter would rush inside of the sanctuary, as the others would yell out for him to come back. However, what would surprise everyone even more was as Peter would enter inside of the sanctuary, it would start to glow again. As he made his way inside into the first room, he would see Emilia on the floor. As he reached out to her, he would begin to pass out. Peter would awaken to a familiar sight. He would find himself in his bedroom, back at home. Although, how had he gotten here? He couldn't have been back home. That shouldn't have even been possible. As he looked around, his vision was rather blurry as well. It was back almost as if he had to wear glasses again. He would reach out for his dresser before he would fall out of bed. The door would open as he would hear a familiar voice. His Aunt May telling him that he was going to be late for school if he didn't get out soon enough. As Peter got back up to his feet, he would try to see Aunt May, but he couldn't see her at all. She was nothing but a blur. She would remark that if he were going to see, he needed to put his glasses on. Peter shaking his head as he was pretty sure he didn't need them. All the same, he would reach out for his dresser where he would find his glasses. As he placed them on his face, he could see that he indeed did need them in order to see. As he looked in the mirror, he could tell that his body wasn't really the same either. He couldn't really describe it, but he didn't feel like himself. Hey kiddo, you don't want to be late for school, do you? You're gonna miss that field trip of yours. Ben? Well, I prefer Uncle, but yeah, that's me. Peter couldn't even muster up the words. He would rush to his Uncle Ben immediately and just wrap him into a hug, tears streaming down his face as he began to bawl out crying. Come on now, I thought you were too old to cry. It's just... Hey. Look, I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, it's nothing to worry about, kid. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, I promise. Peter would try to get himself together, but there was just no way that he could. It was his Uncle Ben. He hadn't seen him in so long. So much had changed. Peter would get dressed for school as he would go into the kitchen with his aunt and uncle. As they were looking on the TV, there would be talk about the Avengers and many of the things that happened in the world. Aunt May would think about that terrible incident that happened all those years ago. It was around the time when Peter was 8 years old, about 8 years or so. His aunt and uncle had taken him to the Stark Expo to give him a chance to see the living legend Iron Man. However, at the event, things went awry and a legion of Iron Man-like soldiers went on an attack. Iron Man had actually saved Peter's life by incident, as he had stepped in between the young boy who had come face to face with one of the Iron soldiers, blasting him away and telling him good job before he flew off. Of course, for Peter, he would have no way of knowing that that would have a profound effect on him as well as his life. As Peter got dressed for school, he would make sure that he had everything that he needed. As he were getting ready to leave, his Uncle Ben would offer to drive him, Peter deciding that he would be more than happy to do so. This was shocking Aunt May a bit, as recently Peter had been more or less trying to be more independent. Although, out of the blue, he now wanted to take rides with his uncle. Although Uncle Ben would simply chalk this up to Peter just wanting to spend some quality time, and he'd be more than happy to do so. The two would get inside of his car as they made their way to the school, as Peter would be just in awe of what was happening around him. He knew he had to be focused on other things, but for some reason he was back. He had a second chance. There were so many things that he could do, so many wrongs that he could right at this moment. For Peter, he almost didn't even want to go to school. Wait. He remembered this day. How could he forget? The field trip. This is the day that he became Spider-Man. No, this couldn't be right. If this was the day that he became Spider-Man, then there were so many things that he could change. Uncle Ben didn't have to die. In fact, he could go back to his normal life. As he thought about this, Uncle Ben would speak to him in the car. "Hey Peter, you okay? You seem like you've been going through a lot recently." "It's nothing, it's just I've had a lot on my mind, and I know. You're reaching that age. You're becoming a young man right before our eyes. I remember when you were just this tall. Couldn't even reach your foot to a steering wheel, and now you're almost old enough to drive. Me and your aunt, we're truly proud of you, Peter. You've got a lot of things to deal with, a lot of pressures to take on. But you know what I always told you, right? Yeah, I know. With great power, comes great responsibility. But is it necessary, though?" "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, what if you don't want great power?" "Well, there's nothing wrong with not wanting power. God forbid all the people in this crazy world who try to get it. But sometimes we can't really deal with the hands that we're dealt. Sometimes we're given things that maybe we didn't want. And a lot of times there's not much that we can do about it. But what if you could? Well then, I guess it'd be up to you to decide if it's really worth having in the first place. I mean, no one's saying you have to take on all this responsibility at once. I mean, God forbid all the mistakes I've made in my life. But all the same though, you reach a point where you gotta make that decision, Peter. Whether or not you want that power and responsibility, it's up to you. No one's gonna force you to take it. You have free will. But at the same time, if you don't decide to step up and do it, other people are going to have to. But what if you don't? I mean, is it fair though? Why? Why what, Peter? Good people suffer sometimes, you know? And there's nothing that you can do about it. What are you supposed to do then? Well, I reckon you do what you can. Yeah, right. Come on. You don't think I don't have any regrets in my own life? I do. Not everything has come easy for me and your aunt. There have been plenty of times where I've wanted to give up. Plenty of times where sacrifices have had to be made. But all the same, I wouldn't regret any decision I've made, because it's led me to be right where I need to be. And you know something? I'm proud of that. Peter would be left in awe of his uncle's words. He would get a chance to feel in the type of man that he truly was. However, all the same, he was still riding the fence about many things. For Peter, he had another chance to make things right. Another chance at a new life. The life that maybe it was the one that he always wanted. As he got out of the car, he would look back to his Uncle Ben, telling him that he loved him. I love you too, kid. And I'm proud of you. With that, Uncle Ben would pull off. As Peter would go to school and he would soon board the school bus, they would arrive to the biochemical labs in New York City. As they made their way through, Peter would have his camera as he would go around taking pictures, going about seeing many of the other students in his class, such as Ned, MJ, Flash. As they made their way through the exhibits, he would see one that was rather familiar. The Arachnid exhibit, home to the 42 different species of spider, as well as the specially genetically enhanced radioactive spider. Inside of the exhibit, he could see one woman in particular. She had long silver hair and rather pointy ears, and dark, piercing eyes. She was dressed in New York apparel, looking almost like a tourist. As Peter made his way in, he would come face to face with none other than the Witch of Greed, Echidna. Wow, Peter, I'm really loving this place here. I can see why you like New York so much. It's so vibrant and fun. What are you doing here, Echidna? Well, I'm just here to see what your decision's going to be. My decision? Well, yes. You are in the trials, are you not? I assumed as much. So I'm guessing this is my test somehow. You're right on that. Your test. Your past. What exactly do you think about your past, Peter? I have a lot of regrets, but who doesn't? But even still, why have you chosen to come here? What do you mean? Well, Peter, you know where you are. You know how this story ends. Radioactive spider bite turns you into the amazing Spider-Man. Does whatever a spider can, am I not right? You know what happens here. But you don't have to experience that pain. You could walk away right now and have everything you ever wanted. Your friends, your family. But I'm a spider. Yes, you are. But Peter, look at the world you live in. You have gods, people who fly in armored-like machines, monsters that grow and turn green. All of these beings. Do you really think the world's going to miss Spider-Man? I mean, no offense, but All you do is go around stopping petty crime and looking at all the people you fought, and, well, they'll even have an issue with you, Peter. That guy, whoever he was, the Vulture, his issue was with Stark. That's Stark's problem, not yours. So why even get involved? You could stay here and be with the girl of your dreams. You know everything about her now. It'd be easy for you to go out with her. No, it wouldn't. Uh-huh. She'd never be able to love me. Not the man that I am now. You really think so? I know so. I only got as far as I did because of everything I've gone through. And I won't just let you make light of my sacrifices like that. Peter, do you understand where your sacrifices have gotten you? You've earned the ire of the Witch of Envy. You're in another world, eons and dimensions away. You may never get back home. Can you really tell me with a straight face that you do not regret anything in your past? It's not about if I regret anything in my past. I just won't let my past define me. That's not the type of person I want to be. And what about your uncle? Does he deserve to die? Shut up. What was that? I said shut up. You can play your mind games on anyone else, but it's not going to work on me. I know who I am, and I know where I'm from. And nothing you say or do is ever going to get me to change that. Is that so? Well, Peter, do you think any of this is real? Huh? This is all a fabrication of your own mind. I'm only showing you what you want to see. As far as I'm concerned, what if this is what you truly want, huh? After all, I didn't ask you to come here. You came here of your own free will. Deep down, this is what you've always wanted. And no amount of time travel or second chances was ever going to change that. Yeah, and so what? I've made a lot of mistakes, Echidna. A lot of things I can't take back. And that's going to be my biggest one. But even still, for as bad as things have gotten, it's led me to being the man that I am now. And I will not let you make light of my sacrifices. And that's your final answer, huh? Yeah, it is. Well, I can sense that you are truly angered with me. If you wish to hit me, that's fine, but I'll have you know I am a girl, so I'm not going to hit you. In fact, I want to thank you. Thank me? Yeah, that's right. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever get the chance to experience. So thank you for that. You are the most perplexing boy that I have ever met. I don't know if it's because you're brave or foolish. Well, must see something about me if I can stump a witch. Indeed. Well, I guess that means your trial is over. You've passed the first stage. Wait, first? That's right. There are 3 stages, Peter. You must be able to pass all 3. Then and only then will the barrier be taken down and will the sanctuary be free. Well, that is something. As much as I would like to see whatever else you have to throw my way, I'm not the one who's going to end up freeing the sanctuary. I'm putting my trust in my friends, so Emilia is going to be the one that does it. You think that girl has what it takes? Peter, She's not like you. You actually have some backbone and resolve. That girl's a lost cause. She'll never be able. She will. I have faith in her. Echidna would smile as a single spider would spindle its web as it crawled down in between them. Peter would hold out his hand as the spider would land upon it, as she leaned into his ear. But what if you're wrong, Peter? Then you'll have no one to blame but yourself. With that, Peter would be bitten by the spider, as his mind would go into a fog-like state, as he would soon awaken and find himself within the sanctuary. He would see Amelia on the ground, shaking in fear, as he would pick her up and bring her out. Garfield and the others would be perplexed, not knowing what had happened, what exactly had gone down inside of the sanctuary. As the group would arrive back to the cabin, Amelia drinking some tea and calming her nerves, Peter would explain to them what he had experienced in the sanctuary, revealing that he had gone through and completed one of the trials. At first it would be hard to believe, but eventually he would reveal that the trials were actually in a set of 3, and that you had to pass all 3 in order to free the sanctuary. Peter would come up with a decision, believing that if it were possible, he might have to be the one that could free the sanctuary. However, before he would even get the chance to make that offer, Garfield would yell out in protest immediately, remarking that only Amelia would be allowed to complete the trials, and that he didn't want Peter anywhere near them. Peter would be shaking in anger. Angered that Garfield seemed to be the one who was slowing down their process more than anything. As he and Garfield were preparing to come to blows, Amelia would stop them, looking to Peter and asking if he had lost faith in her. Peter would try to calm down and assure her that he did have faith, but that he just wanted to help her in any way that he could. Amelia, however, would reassure Peter that everything would be fine, and that she would be able to handle it. With that, Amelia would go to her room to rest, and in the meantime, Peter would be called into Roswald's room, where he and Rom would be there alone, making sure that Amelia wouldn't be able to hear their conversation. No one would be able to hear. Not Otto, not Garfield, not even Ryuzu, the young girl that Peter had met. Well, not young really, just a girl suffering from a case of Benjamin Button syndrome, which was actually a pretty good movie. As he and Roswald were now left alone to speak, Roswald would thank Peter for all of his help, knowing that he had been serving Amelia well up until now. However, Peter himself had more on his mind than that. He would yell at Roswald to get to the point, as he had more questions, and Roswald could see the anger in Peter's face. Roswald would try to calm Peter down, and Rom would as well, but Peter was starting to have enough. He would call out Roswald, because nothing he was doing here made any sense. Why was Roswald even here in the first place? Sure, the sanctuary was a good place to hide, but technically he had control over the Mather's domain. So why would he keep himself here in the first place? If the villagers here as well as the demi-humans were under his jurisdiction, then why exactly did it seem as though everything was happening the way he wanted it to? Roswald could tell that by Peter's words, there was more to it than what he was letting on. But Peter would just continue to pour it onto Roswald, calling him out for the information, as it now come to light that he had known about the witch cult, about how they would attack Amelia when she decided to run for ruler of Lagunica, and how even still he had done nothing to help. Everything up until now, the Maw Beast attack, the witch cultists, maybe even the great white whale. Was all of this his doing? It just seemed too mighty convenient that whenever a dangerous situation was about to go down, he always seemed to be a no-show when it mattered the most. For someone of his stature, for someone as powerful as him, it would implore himself to be at these situations at any given time. However, Roswaal would stop Peter. He would explain to him that his actions had been done on purpose. He did what he did because he wanted Peter and Amelia to receive the credit. If he stepped in every time to help the villagers, then it wouldn't gain Amelia any favor in their eyes. Because Amelia was going above and beyond for them and returning their kindness in kind, it was building a level of trust and rapport. However, Peter would simply yell that all of that was hindsight, that he had no way of knowing. What if things hadn't worked out the way he wanted them to? What if they hadn't beat the witch cultists? What if they hadn't beat the white whale? What if they hadn't stopped the Maw Beast attack? He didn't know all the suffering that came because of it. However, this is where Roswaal would trap Peter in his speech, as he would ask him, "What would you know about suffering, Peter? From where I'm sitting, everyone survived, but yet you speak of them as if you've seen their deaths." Peter would swallow tightly as he would hold his tongue. Not sure if he had given the slip, but if he had, why did it seem like Roswaal was aware? Rom couldn't completely understand everything that was happening either. In fact, if anyone else were in that room, they wouldn't be able to. But yet between the two of them, it seemed as though there was a secret conversation happening within the conversation. Each one was aware that the other was hiding something. They just didn't know what. And they didn't know how close the other was to revealing the secret. In his anger, Peter would simply decide to call the conversation off for the night as he would leave. Roswaal would warn Peter that he would be wise not to tell of this to Amelia, Peter knowing full well that he wouldn't be able to. The next day, they would get word that the villagers would be allowed to go back home. Since Amelia was staying back to complete the trials, there was no reason to keep the villagers there in the first place. As Peter was preparing to leave, Rom would offer him her support, telling him to watch after her sister when he got back home. Peter would remark that he wasn't going to be gone too long. After he dropped off the villagers and checked in on the mansion, he was going to make a beeline right back there. He shouldn't have been gone any more than a day or two at the most. As he and Otto would leave out, they would take the villagers and drop them off back to their home. As they did so, Peter would take his own dragon carriage as he would arrive back to the mansion, the sky becoming rather clouded and dark. As he made his way inside, it would be eerily quiet. No one would answer him at all. As he walked down the halls and the corridors, Peter wondering where Rem or where anyone else was for that matter. He would call out, but he would get no response. Eventually, though, he would hear footsteps coming from around the corner. As he looked down at the other end of the hallway in particular, he would see Rem. Her face would light up as she was happy to see that Peter had come back home. As she rushed forward to Peter, running as fast as she could, Peter's spider sense would go off. Just out of the corner of his eyes, he would see a bevy of knives heading towards them. Peter telling her to get down as he would jump and lunge forward, pushing her to the ground as a few of the knives would be buried in his back. He used the speed in his body just enough to cover Rem and shield her from the attack. His right thigh had 2 knives deeply pierced within, his left leg pierced at the calf, and one in his shoulder. Much blood would begin to spill from his body as he yelled out in pain. Rem getting up to see what had happened. Peter's body would be shaking as he tried to pull out the knives as fast as possible. However, each time he did so, it did more damage, to the point where his legs were shaking and it was hard for him to stand. As on the other end of the hall, he would see a face that he had not seen in a long time. My. You've been here for all so long. You kept your promise to me, didn't you? You weren't going to die until I would get to see your entrails again. You remember me, don't you, Spider Boy? Peter would look as his eyes would come face to face with none other than the Bowel Hunter herself, Elsha. As Rem would enter into her demon-only form, retrieving her mace, she would go to do battle with the Bowel Hunter. Peter on hobbling legs would yell at her to get away, Rem remarking that Elsha was going to pay for what she had done to Peter. Peter would eventually get all the knives out of his body, his regenerative powers working overtime as he was slowly beginning to heal, although walking was rather difficult. As a flurry of blue and purple would move all throughout the halls. Whatever advantage Rem had in strength, Elsha could match in speed, and she had power also. Kicking the blue-haired girl around, Peter would lunge out shooting his webs to try to buy her some space, Rem believing that she had gotten in a good shot on Elsha, as the mace would slam into her head before driving her into the ground. Rem would turn to Peter as she would rush towards him. However, with her back turned, Peter would see in the split second Elsha getting up, moving almost at top speeds. Before Rem even had a chance to stop it, she would have herself entirely skewered as Elsha had dug her blades into her gut. As her internal organs would begin to spill onto the ground, Peter would howl out into the heavens, now pissed at what she had done. I'm sorry. Did I kill your girlfriend? Well, no worries. You'll be joining her soon enough. I wonder what yours will look like. Peter was holding himself up by one of the doorknobs as he reached for his sword. He used it as leverage as he was preparing for his attack, unsure of what he was going to do. Before he would get a chance to, however, the door would immediately fly open. As he fell inside, he would be greeted by Beatrice, who would be clutching her book. As the door would close behind him, Peter would rush over to Beatrice, picking her up. Beatrice, unsure of what had happened to Peter, he would tell her that they needed to get out of there as soon as possible. Beatrice, however, wouldn't leave. Peter telling her that now was not the time to be stubborn. As he looked closer at the book, though, he could see that it looked rather familiar, recognizing it as one similar to the one that Pelagius had. Peter would back away from her as he asked how she had gotten it. She would explain that it was her tome, and also her life. That for so long she had been waiting for a person. She had wondered if Peter could be that person, but it was obvious that he couldn't be. Peter tried to ask her who was this person. What was she talking about? Beatrice would explain that everything she had been through in her life had been because of the tome. Everything she did, it had all been written down beforehand. That she lived her life through that book. This was more than what Peter could handle, as he would tell her that they needed to get out of there as soon as possible. Beatrice, however, would still be too stubborn to leave. Peter had to get her out of there. He had to go find Rem. He had to do something. However, before he could even get the chance, the door would open behind him, now cutting off their only chance of escape, as Elsa would be guarding the door. Peter would draw his sword in his arm. As it was hard for him to stand though, he would fight through the pain. Beatrice cowering in the corner, telling Peter that they needed to leave, that he was in no condition to fight. However, even still, Peter wasn't going to let Beatrice be harmed. Beatrice would yell for him to not fight fate, that it was useless. However, even still, Peter would tell her that he was going to fight it with everything he had left. As he would lunge at Elsa, the two would engage in a flurry of swordplay, although it was quickly seen that due to his injuries he lacked the skill and the strength needed to battle her. She had become rather bored, as Peter was now no longer really much of a plaything. As she began to cut up his body more and more, the only reason Peter was able to last as long as he did was because of his spire sense and his natural strength and reflexes from the enhanced radiation of the spire bite. In the end though, he was being worn down, as he was kicked through by rows of books at a time. Elsa would then turn her attention over to Beatrice, as she would go to strike her down quickly. Peter would rush in an attempt to save her. However, this had been a trap, as at the last second, Elsa would fly into the air behind him. In a quick flash, she would swipe her blade at Peter, and Peter would attempt to block it. He thought that he had, but in the end he had been hit. As he looked down, he could see that he had been slashed across his gut. He would clutch onto his stomach as he started to bleed out profusely and cough up blood, as Elsa would then make her way over to Beatrice, remarking that this had been too easy, although he had arrived a bit sooner than what she was expecting. Peter would ask what she meant by this, as Elsa would remark that her targets were two maids and the shut-in, and that Peter wasn't supposed to arrive for another 2 days. Now Peter had much more to worry about. Someone had set them up once again. Someone had now been targeting the mansion. As he held onto her ankle, trying desperately to stop her, Elsa would raise the heel of her shoe and drive its spike into his skull, as his blood would pour out onto the floor. Peter would eventually fade into the darkness, unsure of what had happened. But now there was no way to mistake it. His trials were far from over. This concludes What If Spider-Man Was in ReZero, The Princess and the Spider, Season 2, Part 1. As always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for What If Deku Was a Power Ranger, Heroes of the Morphing Grid, Part 9, that will be coming out later on tonight. But as always, for all this and more, I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcasting signing off, and I'll see you next time.